Superficially, there's a lot of obvious similarities between Overlord and the all-too affluent isekai genre, especially SAO. They both follow an extremely overpowered main character trapped in an alternate game world that amasses a harem, and unfortunately doesn't bone any of them. Well, at least he doesn't bone them on screen, and to us, that's tantamount to getting self-cockblocked. Albedo character arc when? Anywho, despite these fundamental similarities, if you look at how these two series are regarded by the public, and in this case I'm referring to YouTube, the reaction to each of these series are drastically different. While Sword Art Online and other superficially like-minded isekai have an overwhelmingly negative reputation, Overlord's is astoundingly positive. And no, I don't think it's just because praising every new hyped show gets views. Well, at least I don't think that's the only reason. But it's absolutely more than that. There's more than enough that makes Overlord stand out from its bare bones classification to me in order for me to make this video. How a cliche-seeming narrative like Overlord, and particularly its main character, Ainz avoids the isekai problem entirely and completely flips the scales, using it for its greatest advantage. Firstly, as far as protagonistic mechanics, it's gotta be clear as to what type of story we're watching, and in that regard, Overlord has a well-known term called narrative veritability. Okay, not gonna lie, I just made that well-known term up, but it makes sense and we're gonna use it because I don't want to keep explaining the concept. Good? Good. Overlord portrays Ainz as a level 100 character off the bat, and all the enemies he fights are, yes, lower levels. He therefore wins. Makes sense. And these wins don't need to be pulled out of Ainz's unfortunately very bony ass. This immediately puts him in a very different category than Kirito and most shonen characters, especially protagonists alike, where those series have little to no narrative veritability. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing, if it's done wrong, it could be very painful to watch, especially if it's done over and over. To elaborate, Kirito, Deku, and Dragon Ball, as examples, have no narrative veritability, and that's where the term plot armor starts showing up more and more. If Kirito's a quote-unquote really strong player, so I'll arbitrarily rank him as a level 85 dude, while Ainz wins his fights cause he's a higher level than his opponents, that's not how Kirito wins, at least for the most part. Kirito is OP because he fights foes above his level all the times, and with the power of love, friendship, and whatever, he pushes himself past his limits to win. It's the getting a new sword to one-on-one beat the Gleam Eyes, an opponent designed to take on hundreds of players, or Kirito coming back from the dead to beat Heathcliff. It's that stuff that clearly grounds SAO as a show that does not rely on narrative veritability for better or for worse. Now, to prove this point, I use Deku and Dragon Ball as other examples to point out that it isn't an inherently negative aspect to the series, as depending on the content consumer, you either loved Deku versus Muscular, or you hated Deku versus Muscular. You either loved Deku versus Shinso, or you hated Deku versus Shinso. Well, that's why I decided to use Deku as an example, and I decided to use Dragon Ball as an example, because in the latest chapter of Dragon Ball Super, the manga, Master Roshi, the guy who was weaker than base Goku in Dragon Ball, who since then has evolved thousands of times. This Master Roshi guy was consecutively dodging Jiren's full force attacks, and Jiren is stronger than the strongest of Goku, so it's just a little bit fresh in my mind. But as far as Dragon Ball, it has near no narrative veritability, for better or for worse. Once again, Swagkage hates it, Geekdom likes it. I get both. That's why for me personally, there's no power level credibility in the series, and that's why, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of scaling Dragon Ball characters. I don't find it to be completely accurate, and I don't even find that to be a negative about the series, because I don't even think that's what Dragon Ball's really about. I'm not gonna really be continuing discussing Dragon Ball here. It is not the subject, but it is necessary for me to mention what I've mentioned to ground how I believe the narrative is structured regarding our favorite Overlord, and the fact that Overlord has full-fledged, well-executed narrative veritability, and it also goes hand in hand with another positive property in its possession. And this other property is another aspect that completely lets it stand out from almost any isekai or shonen as well, and that is the lack of Ainz's pure-hearted morality. Every cliche redundant isekai anime like Overlord involves our protagonist being overpowered, gets his harem, but the difference lies in the naive idealism of the protagonist. I can come up with dozens of examples to this, but from our very own current anime season, we have a pitifully bad isekai anime called Master of Ragnarok. Now, I did not watch Mother's Basement video on it, but judging by the slightly ambiguous title, my deep analytical prowess is unsure as to whether he may have disliked it a bit. Well, anyway, I'm gonna be using Ragnarok as a slight example to focus on the aforementioned naivete. As human beings, we aren't the pure embodiment of selfless goodness. That's just not reality. In the first episode of Master of Ragnarok, our lovely protagonist, aside from having his harem of little sisters, don't ask, had an enemy clan that eventually, after much angst, joined his side very unhappily, after of course suffering defeat at the hands of the protagonist. And of course, don't worry, no one was killed in this massive fight because the protagonist can't kill to defend himself. What the travesty! In any case, a small group of this clan ended up getting themselves in trouble and were gonna be wiped out at the hands of some incredibly powerful enemy force. So, the protagonist, what a hero, risked the lives of his comparatively weaker forces and his harem of little sisters. God damn it, anime. He risked all of them to rescue this small group of people that honestly hated his guts. Yes, their chances were small, but could he really sit back and let them die? Oh, what a hero. I mean, obviously, the result was the protagonist group managed to save all of them. Protagonists didn't suffer a single casualty. They beat the odds, even though they were stacked tremendously against them. And aside from all that lovely bullshit and the complete garbage writing of the whole situation, my reasoning for mentioning this is the naive hero for justice mentality that we saw in the protagonist, being a total moron, but for justice. I find that painful to sit through. Master of Ragnarok is a drastic example of how it can be used in a negative fashion, but just like narrative veritability, it's not like this aspect is always used in a bad way and we can never have an idealistic hero. Taku from My Hero Academia running to try to save Bakugo from the slime with no chance of success in episode 2, and Shiro Emiya from Fate Stay Night putting himself in danger constantly to try to lighten the burden of others despite honestly the importance his life holds in this war, preventing megalomaniacs from possessing ultimate power. For better or for worse, that's the reality of these characters. They're both grounded in an intense idealistic light that Ainz does not have. It's been a long time since the days of Spike from Cowboy Bebop and Guts from Berserk, where we actually have a truly human protagonist, and that's aside from the few like Kazuma from Konosuba, who will by the way definitely be getting his own video. I love him. People don't get him. And once I'm already mentioning that, I'm probably gonna do one on Spike too. I already did one on Guts, and that was my favorite video I've ever done of all time. I'll link it in the description. But if you pay attention to those last few characters I've mentioned, being Spike, Guts, and Kazuma, none of them have this idealistic characteristic, but also none of them are even remotely overpowered in their world setting. The Isekai OP harem genre in particular has a detrimental lack of truly human protagonists. So now that that's all out of the way, let's talk about how the OP Isekai harem king Ainz avoids the Kirito SAO issue, and how his character writing alone is enough to save the entire series. Ainz at this point is hell-bent on taking over the world, but not in the motiveless villain category that I so detest. Ainz is doing so to amass knowledge and power, thereby fully understanding everything there is to understand about his predicament in this new universe. Basically, it's exactly the type of motive that your average, normal, good-hearted human stuck in a position like that would take. He doesn't want a tyrannical rule, thousands of slaves and people to praise him, taking selfies with dead bodies like most kids these days seems to think is pretty cool. Ainz is a good guy. Now, he isn't a naively idealistic prick, and he isn't devoting all of his time and effort solely into helping those in need at the cost of his own goal. This creates some kind of more realistically human character that we're following. And as far as the narrative veritability thing I mentioned earlier, it's serving the exact same purpose in regard to Ainz and how we're perceiving him. Because of outside circumstances, in this case, being maxed out in the MMORPG before getting transferred to that world, he's the strongest around. But this is specifically great in Ainz's unique scenario, despite not being completely cold-hearted because of the fact that subconsciously he regards those around him as NPCs to an extent, and the fact that he's under a constant emotional damper as he's clothed by the body of an undead. It's not like he's fighting selflessly. He won't be needing the power of love and friendship for his narrative, and he's in a narrative where he won't be receiving any. He has narrative veritability, and his overpowering power level is kept high, but it remains accurate with little to no fluctuation throughout the story. Once again, putting a semblance of realism into this isekai anime, and once again keeping his character human. Because, just like any normal human, he remains within the realm of what he can and cannot do, without magic love boosts when the situation becomes dire, adding a buffer to literally any threat no matter the size. Love can cut through that, but it won't in Overlord. This all explains why it didn't go down the SAO route, and why its reviewers are praising it rather than the alternative. So while at this point I've fully fleshed out an explanation for the video's title, I did mention something else in the video itself that I have yet to prove. I said it turns SAO's weaknesses into Overlord's strengths. And that, beauties and gentle beauties, will be the final part of this video. And it's also gonna be a nice, cute, short, brief glance into the psychology of why people like Isekai altogether and how Overlord completely aces that mindset. That's the beauty of escapist fantasy stories. Escapist fantasies are definitely one of the greatest allures as far as Isekai altogether, and for the same reason that people like watching relatable stories, i.e. attributing the tale to oneself, people like watching fantasy, i.e. attributing oneself to the tale, especially when the MC enters a new world at the same time as the viewer does, and knows just as little about his new predicament as the viewer does, as of course they learn about the new environment together. In short, that's why the protagonist to most Isekai anime is a vaguely OP chick magnet without a flamboyant personality. We can place ourselves in the protagonist's shoes to an extent, and that protagonist won't even take up much space within those shoes that we attempt to fill. Most of these main characters can get by as a stoic badass, which aren't technically personality traits, but are rather a vibe given off by the character. A show thriving off an escapist fantasy needs all of that I mentioned, or so it seemed. Well, until Overlord. Ainz is iconic, but he's also only seen in avatar form, with no actual facial features to clash with our escapism. And as far as his personality, well, he's a normal person. He doesn't get the plot armor boosts, he doesn't have a quirky persona, his outer appearance is badass incarnate, which is a perfect escapist fantasy for us, and his internal monologues are exactly the type of thing every viewer would be thinking in his place. Again, a perfect escapist fantasy. Despite the seemingly unorthodox take of this isekai escapist fantasy style, it far outclasses all of its competition in this exact regard. That's why we need all the side story. That's why we need to learn about how he impacts the world more than we need to learn about how the world impacts him. I'd go on, but at this point, if I continue with a character analysis, as opposed to analyzing how his character affects our psychology, I'd possibly be repeating what I said in my Ainz OP analysis, link in the description of the video and at the end of the video. If you like Overlord, I highly recommend checking that one out. I have to say, it's pretty solid, and one of my better entries in my OP analysis series, analyzing overpowered characters done right. So, without further ado, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you for watching, taking your time to enjoy. Leave a like if you did enjoy, and subscribble for more anime content, as well as whatever I decide to shit out. Anyway, I do honest descriptions, which are, well, satirical takes on stuff, and I do in-depth analyses, which are the opposite of satirical takes on stuff. An in-depth glance that possibly shows you a different light, or points out different aspects that maybe would not have been seen at first glance. Yeah, subscribbling would be freaking awesome. Well, also in the description, aside from that other Overlord video, I also have a link to my Twitter. Feel free to follow me there for ultimate unlimited updates and shitposting ability. Link there is also to my merch, as well as a link to my Patreon. All patrons are invited into the Discord server, where we hang out and talk about utter garbage, to be quite honest. I don't know if that's appealing to you, but I have fun there. And special thanks to the patrons Sage of Snake, Lazy Ronin, Fernando, Costa, JD Fincher, E-Laser, Sash, Axel, Rari, MDQ, Praise Lord Girugameshu, Zindergarden, Sergeant Malarkey, JTK75, Miku, and TMFilly. Shout out to TMFilly, by the way. He's actually editing this video. That's how awesome TMFilly is. Love you, TMFilly. Also thanks to the Lord Tweegers, Grumpy Welshman, Large Blab, Tyler Schumacher, Zombie Misha, Carlos Altamirano, and Gavin Anderson, and the God Usopp Rank, Dark Element, Yokai, and Maurice Luis Dreyfus, whose name I pronounce wrong in all of my videos. So thanks to all you guys. Thanks to everyone that was watching this video and managed to get this far. It's extremely appreciated. And let me know if you want me to do more Overlord videos. This is my second Overlord video ever, and it's a pretty fun series, if I do say so myself. Definitely not one of my favorites of all time, but definitely not one of my least favorites of all time. Oh, that's high praise. Either way, I'll see you in the next one. Looking forward to it already. Yeah. Oh, am I. Have yourself a most wonderful evening, and remember to stay weird, fam.